our employees will continue to thrive, how we are going to be able to grow into the future. There is no doubt in my mind that that anxiety is broad, and you are feeling that, especially those of us that are in the radio space, because we've been hit really, really hard by the coronavirus and now by the tragic killing of George Floyd. It's been a very tough environment for advertisers, a very tough time for broadcasters and many other industries. But I do believe that we've shown tremendous heart and that we should show tremendous courage, because I think change is absolutely in the air. And I think some incredibly exciting things are starting to happen. Not only for society, but for the economy as well. We had a very positive jobs report today that I'm sure most of you are aware of, that the market rallied on significantly. We're seeing as a company that while we're down, and it is certainly ugly out there, it's not as bad as we had projected. I do believe that we're probably, I'm not going to call it a V-shaped recovery, but I do think that it's going to be a little bit quicker than what I was anticipating, say 6 weeks ago. So I do see light at the end of the tunnel, and I do see some optimism. And we wanted to put this together for you because Marice is just phenomenal, and she volunteered to do it. We wanted to help give you an idea of what's happening in the industry, and at least from a radio perspective, because that's our specialty. And we wanted to take some time to be able to give you some direction on the best way to go over the current trends and the state of art in those current trends. Marice is going to talk about your state of mind and how your current reads should be, as well as imaging and some other genres. So that's going to be the overall format. And I'm going to do a quick round of introductions, and then I'll hand it over to Marice, who's going to give about a 15-20 minute presentation. And then we've got some questions that Teddy and Dave are going to be going over, along with Marice and myself and Masa, that have already been sent in. And then after that, we will take any questions that people may have that you think of along the way. And if you see there's a little comment box in the upper right-hand corner of your screen, that's where you can type in any comments or any questions that you think of. We got a broad and diverse group today, and really appreciate everyone signing up. So some of this, for some of you, may be a little bit like, oh, I already know this, and some of this was going to be brand new. So we wanted to do the best we can to give as much information for all everyone in the VO industry, for some of the veterans, and also for some of the people that are a little bit newer to the business. So I'm going to give you some background on Marice first. I know many of you know about Marice, but she is also known as the Voice Whisperer. Her career spans entertainment, broadcasting, advertising, and promotion. She worked at an advertising agency for many years and has a brilliant marketing mind. I use her quite a bit to roll ideas off of, and she's been an integral part of Benztown. And not only does she work with us on voiceover front, but quite often she helps us on branding. She's also done an amazing job of developing bespoke websites. If you've not seen some of her websites that she's developed for voiceover talent, I highly recommend checking them out. She also helps build demos, and she distinguishes talent by their work, their commercial, promo trailer, and narration. But she does it in such a way that, we were talking about this yesterday, she is able to just pull that essence out of you. I don't know exactly how she does it, but she's able to look at you and listen to you and just really understand who you are and just pull that essence out of your heart and out of your soul. And that's what I think Marice does best. Something that I think is incredibly cool, and this is probably the neatest thing in my mind. Well, she's got a couple of neat things, but she's an associate of the Actors Studio and an AFI fellow, but she was also Marlon Brando's last coach and director. So that is a little bit about Marice. We've got also joining us today our Vice President of Operations, Masa. A little story about myself and Masa. We were both at Clear Channel at the same time. And this was in 2008. And on President Obama's inauguration day, we were both, as we like to say, invited to leave Clear Channel. I know that many people, unfortunately, have been invited to leave, many broadcasters because of COVID-19, and there's been a lot of furloughs in the economy. And I know it's a very, very tough time, but I want you to know that Benztown would not have been born if it weren't for a very tough time. In 2008, we were in the throes of, and unfortunately, Clear Channel got mass layoffs. I'm catching a little bit of noise. If your microphone isn't muted, if you could please mute it, I would appreciate it. Thank you. But both of us were able to, from that very crummy experience, band together and form, along with Andy and Ollie, our partners, Benztown. And Benztown was born out of the Great Recession. So it really was a silver lining in getting laid off. And we actually like to say getting laid off from Clear Channel was the best thing that ever happened to us professionally. So he's joining us today, incredibly talented, and is on the call. We also have Teddy Schrader, who most of you guys know is our West Coast Director of Commercial Production. Teddy spent over 20 years in the music industry. He's worked with some of the biggest brands in the world, including Delta Airlines. He actually programmed and did a lot of the imaging for the in-flight music channels that listen to, and over 10 million flights worth of these channels he programmed. He's also programmed audio for Air Force One and the Bush and Obama administration. He's been with us for a couple of years now and is very talented. Dave Savage, our East Coast Director of Commercial Production. Many of you may know Dave. He was at Clear Channel as well for many years. He headed up the Clear Channel Creative Services Group. He actually told me earlier this morning, I thought was incredibly cool, that for 6 years in a row, CSG, they won a Mercury Award. And I said to him, I'm like, man, that's like Michael Jordan. He had 6 championships in a row working at CSG, and is a very bright, not only a creative director, but great talent, writer, voiceover talent as well. On the line with us. And then Matt, our Director of Custom Imaging, is here as well. Matt started his career at Mix as a production assistant, which is an iHeart station in Providence, Rhode Island. Eventually landed a gig as a creative services director for KISS in Boston. And then we stole him away from iHeart a couple of years ago. And Matt oversees our custom imaging department and images over 300 radio stations. So that's who's joining us. And that's a little bit of background of the esteemed panel, and then myself. And I'm sorry that I'm bringing the average down, but I'm here as well. But thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to hand it over to Marice so she can get into the presentation. Marice. Teddy, I'll unmute you here in a second.
Okay. Gosh, sounds like Roberta. Did you do that, Roberta? The muted, unmuted? Anybody hear me?
Yeah, we can all hear you. That was me.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that voice that says muted or unmuted sounds a little like Roberta to me. You'll have to see, my dear, somebody owes you some money. So in my concept for this particular session is basically an overview of the state of the art based on the state of the mind. And in looking at making notes, I read, articles all over the internet. I get my information just about anywhere, including the shopping channels, because that talks to me about middle America behavior. And it just dawned on me where we are is really, we're kind of on track. And when I say that, I mean, I went back and I looked up when a book called Future Shock was published. It was published in 1970. And I've just been downloading some pages this morning of quotes. The philosopher futurist Alvin Toffler wrote the book. He's written about 4 books on his predictions. And essentially, it was the impact of what was then a very small growing influence of technology. But he saw what vast changes it would bring to our lives. And if you actually read these quotes, or I'm going to order his books because I think every sentence is a treasure trove of information, it really is kind of affirming, because what it says is we're pretty much on track. The only difference, I think, is that the virus accelerated everything. And one of the other phrases it came out of this time of predicting the future was the electronic cottage. Well, those of us in voiceover, we've been living in the electronic cottage for 20 years now. And so when we went into quarantine, the only difference was that you don't have as much alone time as you did if you have family or you have other people living in the house. And that impinges on you on a personal level and your personal space. And so in that way, we're all part of the collective experience that the globe is going through. But for our profession and our career and our work, we've been ahead of the curve for a long time. And in looking at where the delivery, the requests from our producing community, where it comes from, it doesn't come out of thin air. It always comes out of where we are culturally and sociologically. And so I just wanted to make some observations because you will see them reflected in the writing. I actually just worked on an audition this morning for a potential imaging job for someone. And even in the imaging area, I'm seeing a shift. And that shift is, for want of a better phrase right now, is a kinder, gentler delivery, depending on the format. And what it's really, the top notes of the themes of our culture right now are an emphasis on how very fragile we are and the humanity at the center of everything. And that going forward, reading a lot of these articles and interviews from people who are heading up companies and even HR people, I mean, the whole vast collection of those of us who deal in the human resource of us being the prime genitors of our world. It really boils down to there will be a loss. We're in a state of mourning for what was, for the loss of familiarity, of routine, of being in charge of our lives in some way. And the trade-off is that there's an embrace of some aspects of our lives that we were forced to experience that people really, really want to hang on to. And so there is a shifting of priorities, and you're going to see this in the copy that's submitted to you. And whether it's just a different kind or a tone in the delivery of a liner, or it has to do with different approaches in voiceover, the clues are always in the copy. And there's always a word or a phrase that gives you permission to figure out how to dress for the party. It's just, to me, very important that we actually really understand the party that we're at. And that even though the virus was the accelerator, we are actually on track based on what futurists had told us we would be experiencing. Maybe not our generation, maybe it would have been another generation down a few years, but generations have also changed too. A generation used to be defined by a span of 20 years. Now it can change in 20 minutes. So that acceleration is head spinning. And I think the main quote I'm going to use from Toffler is what he calls future shock. He said, "It is the shattering stress and disorientation that we induce in individuals by subjecting them to too much change in too short a time." And if that was ever where we are now, and that was, he wrote in Future Shock in 1970. So if you're curious at all, and you have some time on your hands, get a hold of either looking at some of his other quotes. Every quote is a gem, and every quote, I think, goes to helping us kind of settle in to where we are now and accept it as not an anomaly, but as where we're actually supposed to be, and what it is that we want to. One of the suggestions is to take stock of what new experiences we've had based on getting to know people that we live with, that we get to reach out to people we haven't spoken to in a long time. And what so many of the interviews say is, I kind of like that. I kind of like the slower pace. I kind of like the fact that I'm not a slave to my work in my job as much as I was. A lot of people talk about the one thing that is, singularly missing now is their commute to work, which most of us don't have any problem with. By the same token, it is a way of looking at where we are now in a positive frame of mind, because ultimately the work that we do We are the messengers of good news. And even if we're talking about something as heartbreaking as what's been going on, the message is you can help. You can be a part of. You can be an engine for change and an engine for enhancement of how we deal with each other. And I think it's very important that as frustrating as it can be and as depressing, and some people suffer terribly in isolation, there is a greater good that can come out of all of this. And that is that we appreciate more what you can't put a price tag on. And there's going to be a reassessing of priorities. All of what I'm saying goes back to one thing, and that is how it shows up in the material you're asked to deliver. But I think it's always very important to understand the context, where specs are coming from, where ideas are coming from, and then to be okay with it. Because if you're in resistance to it, anything that's going on for you is going on for your mind, and is going on for your mind, and then your voice. The voice is the mirror of the mind. And so I've seen so many people react to material, and they're being asked to do deliveries that they, not necessarily what they consider their core competency. Well, everybody's being asked to rearrange their thought processes right now. And in so doing, when you put them back together again, it's like a Rubik's Cube. There are different ways of assembling it. And I think that that's ultimately very, very refreshing. It gives you, we've been forced to reboot. So I wanted to go over some of the observations that some of the social scientists, for want of a better word, have made about this time and how people are reacting. And one of the words, a bunch of words that I just wanted to mention, because they can be elephants in the room. And another aspect of this time is the permission to look at the state of mind and mental health as a real thing and not something to lower your voice when you speak of. Years ago, if you were talking to a friend and mentioning that one person had cancer, it was always cancer. You always lowered your voice for it because it was verboten. It was taboo to think of it. It was too scary. And if it's too scary to even utter, then it's too scary to do something about. So here are a couple of words to make friends with and acknowledge. Cabin fever. Well, that sets in. The more successful you are, the more you're going to get cabin fever or golden handcuffs anyway. Impatience, uncertainty. I'm about to publish an article on LinkedIn, and I was calling it the age of disruption, but I actually think I'm going to change it to the age of uncertainty. And living in uncertainty is unsettling unless we accept the fact that this is the certainty. Things will continue to keep changing, and all that we have to do is be willing to take a look at it and see where the opportunity is. Another word is worry, depression, and ultimately it's been pretty scary. And I think that by acknowledging and sharing this with each other, you diffuse the potency of it. So those are just some of the top notes that I wanted to cover. But the main thrust of this is to take a look at the fact that the cultural conversation that we live in is the driver for the reasons why you're being asked to deliver material the way you're being asked. And I often think it's ironic where people say, I want to be given challenges, I want to be given different opportunities. And then when they come in, then, they'll call for a directed audition and they'll say, I don't know why they sent that to me. And I said, well, didn't you want a new opportunity? Yeah, but this isn't exactly what I do. Well, so what? Somebody had a thought. And as long as it is not extremely out of the realm of possibility. If you're a guy and it says, females only, absolutely. But anything in between, what have you got to lose? Because every time you make a step in a direction that's unfamiliar, you'll learn something. You'll learn something, and the very fact that you've done that institutes a different version of you every day that you're on the planet. I often say, if I learn one thing, if I go to a seminar myself, or I read a book, or I have a conversation, I take one thing away from it. That's one more thing that I didn't know the day before or the moment before. So I guess the main thing is that up until this time, there has been permission to express yourself in terms of being a critic. And while that's swirling around us, it gives you a mindset of negativity. The voice is the mirror of the mind. You want to have a conversation, you want to rant about something, do it, get rid of it, and then shift. And always find something in the material that you can find in an affinity for. Whether it's, if you're the voice of a station, or you're auditioning for a station that maybe has a music format that's not one you would personally listen to, take some time and understand why people listen to it, what the music, why the music speaks to them, so that you are always working from what I call authentic emotional endorsement. I'm sorry if that beeped. I don't know how to turn my messaging off. Oh, okay, I hear you. Okay, so one of the first things you do when you approach a new piece of material is look at the masthead, because there's always a lot of information there that can give you clues. Like this morning when I was working with this person on this audition, and I said, where is the station located? Because that also tells me the cultural conversation in which this station lives, even if they're playing country music, even if they're playing classic rock. The manner in which the station speaks to its audience is still influenced by that geographical location, and that factors in. So it may be a little more extreme or a little more dramatic in the South, and a little bit more information driven, a little more up in your head in the Northeast, or it'll have more of an environmental focus, just in terms of the initiatives that stations participate in, fundraisers and so forth. All of that, everything means something. And what all of this does is gives you an opportunity to keep refreshing what is essentially quite repetitious. And that's, the trap of being successful. And it's very easy to fall into that trap and figure out where you're phoning it in. And when you feel that happening, I mean, it's one thing to go on technique for a day or two when you're distracted by something in your personal life, and you've got the consistency of delivery. Don't let that go on too long, or you're opening the door for someone else to come in there and quite frankly replace you. Because one thing I've tried to get across to those who hire is that there's a lot of equity built up in the voice that they choose. There's a relationship that you have formed for them with the listeners or the viewers, if you're doing TV affiliate work or any part of voiceover, you're creating a relationship. And if there's a consistency of the sound of what that voice is, that's very comforting to the listener or the viewer. And most people who are in a position to hire talent forget that. If they're new to the station, they're new to the company, they want to mark their regime, and they will, the most fragile person, the most fragile element of their marketing is the voice. But what I feel should do is give you, the incumbent, the opportunity, because what they then won't do is sacrifice all that equity that they've built up. And yet, on the other hand, new person comes in, wants to hear other voices, it's an opportunity. So it's a double-edged sword. But remember that ultimately, when you are given the opportunity to do new work, the audience is not the person who sent it to you, and it's not the agent or the company. It's the audience. And I find over and over again, when I listen to work that's self-directed, it's the trying to get the job read, or it's the phoning it in to what it is you think people are looking for, rather than what is it that when I, as a listener, hear that liner or that sweeper or that commercial, it gives me a little enhancement in my day in some way. Either it reminds me that I'm listening to my old friends, it tells me I'm in the right place. I've often said if Eyewitness News ever changed their music and that downbeat did not announce the news, people will think they were in the wrong place. We are so oriented to sound, and it is such a touchstone for us. So remember that when you're delivering, to not get so jaded and not get so inured to the fact that this means something to people. It really, really does. And in the chaos that we're working in now, particularly the chaos that we're living in, the consistency of sound is very reassuring. So with that, I wanted to just continue on with some of the aspects of the new normal. Am I hearing somebody ask something? It's probably outside. So one of the first aspects is the need for people to connect physically, to actually hug each other. It's so interesting that that's the number one new skill that people have taken on is cooking, baking, and gardening. And they are hoping to bring a lot of these new acquired skills, learning a language, in moving forward. So you're going to see a lot of copy and a lot of scripts reflecting more of the lifestyle and a reinforcing of the connectivity that we're craving. Let me just take what people are also seeking is a sense of control over their lives. And there is coming out of all of this a cautious optimism. And I think the next wave of anthem scripts, which are companies talking about themselves and what they're doing and what they're contributing and how they're cleansing the environment so it'll be welcoming when you come home. All of that is going to start taking on a much stronger sense of cautious optimism. And one of the other aspects of that is a reveling in that which is small, enjoying small pleasures and small moments as opposed to big aspirational travel. There will probably be an emphasis on RVing and camping, and the closeness that people have experienced with their family or their partners or even their neighbors is something that people want very much to hang on to. So you're going to see more and more of that connectivity coming into the writing as a reinforcement for whatever it is, whether it's the backyard barbecue or it's a new toothpaste, doesn't matter. Somehow or other, people will start connecting what it is they have to offer to these new sensibilities of appreciating what's small, appreciating what's each other, and appreciating the sense of community that we know these words have been in the culture, but they really mean something because we've all been forced to experience them now. Let me just take a little more note at my notes here. There's also a new level of self-awareness and introspection that people feel they have had time and it didn't feel self-indulgent. And they're actually coming out of this whole time. This is basically a time out with a better sense of who they are and how they want to define their lives going forward. And most of them are responding to the idea they want to give back. They want to become much more involved in community and in causes that are meaningful. So you're going to see companies aligning even more fully with whatever charities or initiatives they designate as objectives for them as well. So the first phase of this shift, once we went into quarantine, was the caring concern. And we got to a point where absolutely every commercial was actually the same commercial. They weren't selling anything. They were offering a camaraderie in terms of where we are. And as jaded as we can get, because we see this moment after moment, the public hasn't heard it enough. There's still a sense of needing that comfort and that soothing quality. So when you get a piece of copy and you think to yourself, oh, I've seen this for the last 6, 8, 10 weeks. So what? It's always fresh and new for the audience if you approach it that way. So make sure that you don't let your own battle fatigue filter into your reads. I worked with a performer some years ago who was in a very successful Broadway show, and he had won the Tony, and we were having dinner. I was in New York, and he said, well, I said, so, what's going on? And he said, well, it's all very exciting. And he said, I'm thinking of leaving the show. And I said, well, where are we going? And he said, well, I've had some nibbles, some film and some TV stuff. And I go, you know the rules, never leave. And he said, I've been doing the show for 2.5 years, 8 performances a week. And it was very draining musically for him. It was like four octaves for a male. It's a very, very dramatic shift. It's very exhausting, and 2 performances on Wednesdays and Saturdays. So he ran down, everything, started in Canada, then went to the West End, then to New York. And he just looks at me and I go, that's the job. The fun is being told you got the role. That's the excitement. And of course, putting on the show and doing what you love. But yes, it can get to be drudgery. But every night is opening night for the audience. Every read you do could be the one and only time people hear what it is you're saying. So make sure it is. Make sure that each time you go into a read, I don't care how many liners there are, I don't care how many times you've said the same lines, it is the first time for someone. That's the job. Let me take a look and see. More mindful, yes. People are saying that they just want to be more mindful. What this has done is it's put us in the absolute center of the now. We are living in the now in a way we have never lived before, because most of us live in the future. Too many live in the past. If you're living in the past, you're probably depressed. If you're living in the future, you're probably anxious. If you're living in the moment, this is where you're supposed to be, because that's really all there is. More mindful, people want to consume less and consume less, and I think it's more community. Save more. Oh, there's a huge consciousness of having what I call the war chest. Whenever anybody talks about wanting to do voiceover full time, I go, you better have a war chest, and it better be something that you could live on for at least 2 years. Not that you would need to deplete it completely, but it's the idea that that mental security is important to your ability to deliver. If you're worried about something, if you have concerns on your brain and you don't bargain with yourself the way Scarlett O'Hara did, and she said, I'll think about it tomorrow, it's going to filter into the read. And the people who are making a decision about working with you or not may not know that you have a concern. They just know that somehow there's a disconnect and you're not fully present to telling the story that's in front of you, and they'll move on. Which brings me to the density of people pursuing whatever work it is you do, whatever work the rest of us do in the voiceover realm, in the spoken word realm. Never have there been more people pursuing this work than there are now. Never is. And simply because we're the only game in town when it comes to acting. And production is shut down, theater is shut down, every other area is shut down except voiceover, news anchors, the essential presenters. And so what that's done is it has driven agents and managers hiding under their beds. So anybody that thinks this is a great time to refresh your materials. This is a great time. If you don't have a website, you have to. I mean, this is your storefront. It's imperative to have one. Have you refresh your materials, refresh your delivery, and get ready for the relaunch of life as we will know it. But this is not time to change representation. The same kind of scary stuff is going on an individual basis. Agents have had to let people go. Some have, I heard about one in LA, a smaller agency has already closed its doors. There will be consolidation. There will be people, switching agencies, people leaving and forming a new one. But the main thing is this is a time of absolute disruption for those people who can provide you with the opportunities. So stay put, just stay put and bide your time if you feel that this is something that you would want to do. They do not want to hear from people looking for representation. What they want to do is hear from people who can offer the people they represent work. And they feel that very strongly. And it's a very, very anxious time for the representation and the producing community. And so the very best thing you can do is just go into formulation and take a look at your materials and basically make sure that when everything does open up again and people are interested in seeing what else is around, that your materials are absolutely in tip-top shape. And just remember one thing, that in considering representation, there are two new aspects. One is not as new as the other. One is credits, bragging rights. And even if you've done an in-house communication, if there's a logo that can be attached to your image, if it isn't on your site, it should be. And instead of testimonials, my feeling is those logos are your testimonials. Let them reinforce, the validity of what it is you have to offer. And the other is social media. And this is a very, very tricky conversation, because social media gives people the opportunity to overshare. At the same time, it gives you the opportunity to distinguish yourself in a dimensionalized way. When you post, offer something, whether it's a book you read or it's something you watched the night before, whatever. It's not as direct as posting the latest imaging you did for a new station and thanking people for hiring you and so forth. That's very transparent. But in the course of you talking about the kind of work that you do, maybe there's an observation that you've made, or there's some sort of reference that you can share. Giving people something tangible is so much better. They will know, everybody knows why you're on there and what it is you want to accomplish, but do it in such a way where it isn't quite so on the nose. And the other thing is, I don't know if, I ran across somebody who actually still does cold calls. This is probably the worst time in history. First of all, you shouldn't ever do cold calls, in my opinion, unless you really have a relationship with these people. And that is because if you're on the phone, you're not in the booth. And I would like them to think that you're always in the booth, and aren't they lucky they can squeeze a few minutes out of you to do their work. We're in the image business. We're creating images for other people. We have to maintain the one for our own. A little elusive, a little mystery about you. You're not sharing absolutely everything there is to know about you. And one of the things I think is so interesting is, in watching a lot of the news coverage, is when people are being interviewed, almost every person who's now being interviewed from their home is framing themselves with a wall of books, which is very interesting because, reading is becoming a dying art. Just make a note of when you're watching any of the news channels, if you do that. Almost every one of the people interviewed is framing themselves as an intellectual. And so when you're doing something like this, pay attention to your background. Pay attention to what the wall is saying about you. I know my wall is saying what used to be a major focus of my life until March 17th was my last seminar. in Sydney. And my walls are filled with images of all the countries I've gone to, the cities I've gone to. And as I look on them, I'm reminded of the friends and the clients that I've encountered. And that has all come to a screeching halt for me. So having these pictures around me reminds me that eventually I'll get back out there. But realistically, how long is it going to be? That's another thing that is important in these observations, is how long it's going to take for us to feel really comfortable being in a confined space, like a plane, like a restaurant, like a studio, which is why I'm probably not going to do a live seminar for at least a year. I think it's going to take that long. Once the vaccine is available, that's one thing. But then we will have ingrained habits of being a little shy about getting too close to each other. It's going to take a while for us to feel comfortable again. And, so for a lot of us, that's a very, I can commiserate with people who work in the airline industry, because I got to a point where I was recognizing cabin crew and vice versa. So that's quite a dramatic shift for me. And of course, I'm working 100% online now. So safe distance, brands, aha. So all this information is going to be translated into brands having meetings and going, okay, how do we position ourselves? And a brand is either, of course, it can be your radio station, it can be a product, it can be an initiative. It doesn't matter. It is, how do we position and how do we make proper statements about ourselves so that we become welcoming to our target audience, as opposed to turning them off by being a little too sanctimonious or being a little too aggressive, coming out of hiding a little too soon. And the barometer is entertainment and information that helps align them with this new stage that they're in. And it's really, the focus is about on them rather than on us. And when you say us, it is what we observe that is valuable to you, and we acknowledge that. I've often said the thing that in the hierarchy of human needs, on the emotional level, the thing that we value, we fear most, is not the loss of love, it's humiliation. It's being embarrassed, saying the wrong thing, or being at the wrong place, or not being dressed right at the party. And everybody who's doing business right now is trying to assess how to send the right message. So when you see the specs and you see the words on the page, really, really make them your own, because the authenticity of emotion that you can bring to that message makes all the difference in the world. They're just words on a page until you bring them alive from your point of view of how you see the world. People want to hear from real people. They want to hear a person, not a presentation. So, Josh, I think you have some questions.
Thank you very much, Marice. One thing I wanted to add very quickly in regards to these socials, Irma can attest that I read a lot, but I can never remember what the hell I'm reading. But I am reading something right now that was talking about social promotion and so forth. And this particular book spoke about 80% of social posts are what they call me-formers. So it's kind of you're performing for yourself and sharing things about your own personal life, versus only about 20% being what they call informers. And the more that you can do to be an informer and share content that is useful and has takeaways, the better you show up, apparently, at least according to this book that I cannot recall, amongst the social channels. So something you may want to think about. My apologies for not knowing what I'm talking about, but we're going to get on to the questions. Teddy, I'm going to hand it over to you and Dave to go through the the questions that were sent ahead of time. And then if anyone's got any questions after that, just click on that little comment button at the upper right-hand corner, and we'll ask them after Teddy and Dave get done with this round. So Teddy and Dave.
Great. 1 second. I'm going to turn on the mics. This will also I'll turn on yours, Masa. 1 second. All right. And lastly, you, Matt. There we go. Excellent. Sorry about the delay. Oh, so to start off, the first question I have here that you guys sent in, and thank you for all the great questions, is how are people handling the financial impacts? And this one I will start with Masa, but if anyone else has, a note to put in, then please do.
And to clarify, I think radio stations and how they're handling the financial impact, correct, Teddy?
Yes.
Yeah, the buyers, the clients, right? Well, people are terrified. Bottom line, obviously their entire world has been turned upside down, and their clients have seen the faucet turned off immediately as far as revenue, and so of course that's going to trickle onto them. So everybody is dealing with a circumstance that they've never dealt with before, and that there's no playbook for. We see some stations asking to pause payments, but continue to receive work from VO talent in the meantime, in a show of good faith and partnership. Some talent are happy to do it. Some see it as truly a transactional relationship. I give you A, you give me B. That's how it works. I guess it's really a personal thing on what you decide your philosophy is. The way I look at it is that through this whole process, everybody has felt a massive burden. Everyone's had their own burden, whether it's the way your life has changed, whether it's financial, whether it's familial. Everybody's had to shoulder a burden through this. And so if you can be someone or something that alleviates just one of those burdens for somebody, then I think that your value will remain high. So my personal philosophy is, sure, I'll continue to provide the service for a particular time, in good faith, and hopefully once things turn around, we'll be back and running at full speed. But again, that's a personal thing on the way that you choose to operate. We've also seen some broadcast groups start to consider internalizing imaging VO as a service with their own folks, which, between the 55 of us here, is a scary thing, because essentially what that means is they would have their own employees within the broadcast company provide imaging VO for their stations, essentially rendering an outside service useless, which again, very, very scary. Nobody's gone to that length. I haven't seen anybody do that, but I've seen some of those conversations occur. So I think it's as important as it's ever been to really make the service you're providing to the stations indispensable. I think we can probably all agree that if a broadcast group did decide to do that, the quality would suffer. Of course it would. But sometimes these decisions aren't made based on quality. They're made based on staying in business. And so we have to do everything we can do from a service provider standpoint to become indispensable. But those are some of the different chatters that are coming across my desk from the financial standpoint.
Thank you. Anyone else have any other input?
No, I think Masa said it very succinctly. He's got it down, and he deals more on the operational side as far as the transactional side of the business than I do. But I absolutely concur with what he's saying. I guess the one thing I would add, we're doing the best we can to accommodate our customers. I've always been very customer centric, and our customers are both radio stations and voiceover talent and shows and different partners that we work with. And so we do the best we can to help manage through this time with them. And I always believe it's a Kip Tyndall saying, the guy that started the Container Store, to fill your partner's basket to the brim. And that's what we try to do. And, we're managing through like everyone else is. And I would say try to have as much patience as possible and understanding as possible, but at the same time, be persistent and manage your brand and your business, the way you feel fits best.
Awesome.
Can I just jump in and say, because of that kind of thinking, even if they're not going there, they're considering that, they're having that thought, all the more reason that every delivery you do has to be stellar. so that the contrast is irrefutable.
Yeah.
We've got another question here. Somebody wants to know, how important is it in this day and age of branding to hold business accounts on social platforms? Who wants to take that one?
Matt, you want to handle the branding question, or Masa?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in on that. I don't know. You know, from my standpoint, I don't really see it as being crucial. I think it's a personal decision with regard to how much of behind the curtain in your personal life you want to share with your clients. Because when it comes down to it, the buyers, the stations, they're hiring you as a person to provide that service. And most of the imaging VO talent that we work with don't have a separate business page, business account on socials, whatever it might be. You know, they let people see directly into their lifestyle. It creates a persona that is ultimately part of their brand. You know, whether that person is a big sports fan, or whether that person is a gardener, or whether that person loves to water ski, all of that is part of their brand that hopefully is intelligently and thoughtfully curated. So to create a separate business account for your voiceover business, I think, is to strip away some of the uniqueness that makes your brand what it is. That's my personal opinion. Of course, unless your brand is offensive, then yes, create a separate business account.
I agree, Masa. I think it's also, you know, you can create a little stickiness about yourself by showing a little bit behind the curtain and being personal, while also sharing the work that you do. I think there's a fine line, and it can be a nice balance to you know, to connect with people on a different level rather than all business all the time.
There was an interesting study that Nielsen released today, and take it with a grain of salt because it is Nielsen, but basically they came up with the conclusion that vendors should think twice about a media hiatus. And it goes into great length about how important it is to stay on the air. And obviously on the air, in our terms, is through your social accounts and continuing to brand yourself. But I think that there is some advantages at this point when people are making changes, and when in dramatic times, people tend to react and they believe that you have to take an action. And I don't know if that's necessarily right or wrong, but that's what a lot of people do. It puts them in control from a psychological standpoint. And so I think it's very important that you are still omnipresent and you continue to put yourself out there. But I would make sure that that messaging is certainly targeted and honed in. It needs to be thought. I think you need to think about it a little bit more than just throwing out random things.
Teddy, I think that was my question. Was it for me?
We don't have it there, but feel free to weigh in.
Yeah, it sounds like something I wrote, but I guess I asked that question because, you know, sometimes random PDs will find me on Instagram, and I just post a lot of pictures of my kids, and it almost feels like them poking their head over the privacy of fence. And I guess I wanted to know if a business account was more relevant, because it just feels a little awkward. I don't know who these people are, and I'm letting them kind of peek into the window of my house. And so I don't know where the divide is. I don't know where, like, to share with friends, and then all of a sudden strangers are now invited into my home. You know what I mean? Does that make sense?
I have a question. I'm not that sophisticated about this, but can't you have a private room where you have, you know, you have a list of people who are invited into that room, and then the rest of the information is open to the general public?
Oh, I have no idea.
Yeah, I think there's a way. I know there's a way in LinkedIn. Who gets to see this? And you can have, you know, only those I say, or whomever wants to. I think you can investigate that, and then you can distinguish those, you know, people, you know, your nearest and dearest that you want to see pictures of the kids and all the family stuff, and then isolate that in that private room. And it's the same site. It's just who has access to the privacy alert as opposed to the public one.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Brian.
Facebook does
I
have
think
that.
Brian,
What?
from my point, I think that it's, it's kind of it's a personal choice, of course, but I look at the way that just candidly Benztown has branded itself and the way that we try and operate. So much of it is about the personal relationships that we have with our partners and clients, and we let them behind the curtain in terms of what our day-to-day lives are like, and what we do. And I think that develops a stronger bond with partners and clients sometimes, because there is that level of sharing and vulnerability that exists. But obviously I understand that, look, if you're not comfortable with potential clients or strangers at this point seeing pictures of your kids and what you might be doing on a day-to-day,
Right.
I guess it's just a personal thing. At what point do you say, I got to cut that off or not? And the last thing I'll say on that front is that it might be a scenario in which you create a business account only once your personal account and personal brand in the VO business is established. Because if I'm a buyer and I see a Brian Peck VO brand, but I don't know who Brian Peck is, I don't know anything about Brian Peck, well, that doesn't really mean anything to me. But if I already know that Brian Peck is this great guy who does XYZ and this is what it's all about, then Brian Peck VO as a brand page already has some sort of meaning to me.
Great point. Yeah. Okay.
Where you are in your lifespan of your brand, to do that for your business brand. So.
Okay. And that answers a lot of questions.
In the chat section, Jessica just added a link. She said that this is a link that talks about being personal in your social media. People want to be real. Who you are is important, is more important than what you do. So if you want to grab that link, it looks like a GoDaddy story. So check that out in the comment or in the chat section. Thank you, Jessica.
Excellent. Moving along to the next question, and I believe we'll start with Marice with this one. What is the best marketing tool I can start with? Best marketing tools, I'm sorry.
Well, it's your performance. It's, it's what everything begins and ends with. And so your best marketing tool are demos that absolutely are showcases. And there's a difference between a demo that's a resume demo and a demo that is a showcase. A resume demo is usually cut from work that you've done, and it's showing off all of the variety of people and brands and logos and so forth. It's very, very commerce driven, as opposed to a showcase, which is, in my opinion, the one that distinguishes you as a talent and as a performer, storyteller. And ultimately, that's your most important, your most valuable tool is your demo or your demos. And then the next would be the setting in which those demos live, which is the website. And in terms of being a brand, when somebody lands on your landing page, that first impression should begin giving them a sense of what it feels like to be in the presence of your voice. So many people have very clinical sites that are information driven. They're standard templates, and they're to me like the index in an IKEA catalog. They're information driven. But if I land on there and I see, even if it's a nice type treatment of your name and a microphone, please God, don't use any more microphones. That's not a unique statement. If somebody needs a microphone to know they're in the right place, you may not want to work with them. They may not be as sophisticated as you want them to be. The most important thing is, what does it feel like to be in the presence of your voice, and an image and some sort of a quick slogan or something like that. That is the container. That's the idea in which what it is you do exists. That's also that word, the promise. What do I get if I hire this person? So from the moment somebody lands on your materials, they should start being given an idea of what it is that is unique, special, and different enough for them to move in the direction of someone that they possibly haven't worked with before, but in such a way where they sit there and they go, where have I been? She's amazing. He's terrific. Why haven't I known about this person? And give them a little sense of, this is basically, it's an advertisement for you. as opposed to just a rundown of materials and logos and videos and audio and so forth. After a while, it's information overload because the people who are in a position of buying are seeing that kind of website all day long. Give them something that has some entertainment, something that's intriguing or fun, something that speaks to the brand that is you. And then you've got very strong marketing. And then when you want to update people on what's going on, you send out a information, but it should always look as if it's coming from your peeps. Rarely should it come as in first person unless you have a nice working relationship with someone, if there's some professional friendship there. But if it's a general statement out there in the public, have it come from, you know, if you have representation, clear it with your agent or management company, or form what looks like a management company that sends stuff out for you. So that once again, it doesn't look like you're sitting at your computer pushing these buttons. No, you're too busy. You're in the booth. And you have this ecosystem around you that does all this. Make it special. The more distance you can put between you and the UPS guy that walked in that they think can do voiceover, the better off we all are.
Okay. Anybody else want to chime in on that? I've
I
got
think
a
that's
question here. Okay. Here's a question for Masa, and I think this is going to be the very first time you've ever heard this question, Masa. Masa, how do I get on the Benztown VO roster?
Definitely the first time. Personally, I'm a big fan of bribery. So bourbon is a preference for anybody taking notes. Go ahead and send some through. I think honestly, it kind of goes back to what Marice just said. It's about having a developed brand already at the moment that we first meet. It's about having that story be more established. You know, not to put it bluntly, but like, what do you bring to the table? You know, we look at this as a two-way street. We're obviously going to be putting efforts and resources into what we do in this partnership. And so we hope that we encounter folks coming to us who've taken the same time and put the same thought into doing that. There has to be some there already. If you look at the record business, I don't know that any record labels will even give a look at any acts or artists unless they already come to the table with X amount of followers or subscribers on YouTube or, you know, on Twitter or whatever the channels are, right? They have to have an established following. And so it would be great to see that, look, I'm already working with XYZ Stan. Here's my website. It's already put together and curated really well. Show some legwork that's really been put in prior to knocking on the door, really.
And I would add to that, we also try to do the best we possibly can to keep it somewhat limited, because we want to be able to do the optimal job we can to help grow people's businesses. And if the list gets too large, we're not able to do that. And so it is a very tough balance for us to maintain.
Awesome.
If you watch Shark Tank, when the sharks sit up is after they've heard what the product or the idea is, and then they say, you know, have they scaled it in any way? And they say, oh yeah, we're in Lowe's and we're in Home Depot and, you know, we're in Target. Watch how they all sit forward and they can't bid on it fast enough, because it's market acceptance. It's like the Good Housekeeping approval. It's a proven concept that you're somewhere, that other people have booked you, not only booked you, but do so repeatedly. It makes you that much more appealing. And so, you know, it's interesting that Shark Tank started out and it was, you know, up and comers, somebody with an idea, people with a dream. And now they're not buying the dream. They're buying the proven concepts.
Excellent point. For our next question, is it better to fully produce liners? Or I'm sorry, I was jumping one. How important is posting about stations you add on socials? Can it be counterproductive, too self-congratulatory, or vital to show you're a bookable VO? What about sharing good work from current stations and marketing yourself that way? If we could have Marice and maybe Masa chime in after.
I think it's all of that. It just depends on how somebody's going to react. One person will be charmed by it and the other person will see it as braggadocio. You just have to, decide how you want to present it. I mean, that's what your website is for. In the context of your website, then absolutely show them what you got. But as far as social media, I don't know. I think you want to do it a little more obliquely.
Yeah, I think that there's different schools of thought on that. And, for me, I look at it as if you don't tell your story, who will tell your story? And so you do have to be careful about the braggadocious thing that Marice is referring to. But also, I see it as talent can benefit from the concept of recency. And so if a PD or a buyer happens to have seen a post from somebody recently, and all of a sudden 2 weeks later they need to make a change and they're now in the market for a new voice, well, that concept of recency is going to benefit you because you were beating the drum a little bit. And of course it needs to be done with tact, but I do think that there's a benefit to that as long as it's done with some strategy.
Okay, we got one here. Matt, you'll probably want to take this one. Is it better to fully produce liners or just provide stations with voice tracks only?
Yeah, I think it's best to only provide the voice tracks and not produce it. Of course, it makes sense to sort of, dress it up and say, hey, here's what I think that you're looking for. But I sort of relate it in the same way of when myself and my team receive voiceover, we generally like it to be unprocessed, completely raw, so that we can drop it into our template and it's not going to clash with any of our settings. It's if the station is really trying to take it to that level, that next step, and say, hey, what's this going to sound like with some music and some, some sound effects underneath, they'll do that on their end. Of course, if it's specifically asked for, if you're an imaging producer and they say, hey, can you, throw some stuff onto this, then do it. But I would not move forward with that unless specifically asked.
Agree.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt. This one is for Chachi, and maybe Masa, you can join in as well. What is more prevalent, cash or barter?
We deal primarily in barter. We do have some cash business, but the vast majority of our voiceover business is barter. So this will look at it through that lens. So it'll be a little bit more skewed. But as of recently, we've definitely seen a big growth in the barter business. So much so, no joke, during this call, I've had 2 people email me, VO Talent, email me about having stations that are currently on cash and wanting to know if they can talk to us about moving those stations over to barter. And so I think the current situation has really called for stations to reevaluate budgets, and they're trying to do the best they can to save money, and barter is certainly an alternative form of payment for them that is probably more helpful to them today than it was just a few months ago. Masa, you're seeing similar on your side?
Yeah, I think it depends on the broadcast group. Some broadcast groups have certain philosophies and policies about what they do with cash versus barter, so that's just going to align with their own rules. But I think by and large, I mean, stations are short on cash and long on unsold commercial time. So if they're able to make it work via barter, then I think they prefer to go that route, at least as of June 5th, 2020.
The other thing that's interesting to watch, and as I believe as the economy improves, I think we'll see less of that in some of them. I mean, I think barter is always going to be a very popular form of payment, and it's been like that for many years, and I think it will continue to be that way. But I think right now this influx is going to be somewhat temporary. This year should have been an absolute perfect storm for radio and television because it was an Olympic year, presidential election year. We had a lot of positive things, a great economy going into it. So a lot of things that were going to cause demand on inventory. And so that inventory, the sales managers were pricing pretty expensive because no one had any clue that this was going to have the impact, COVID would have the impact that it currently has. And so I think they found themselves more flush with inventory than they thought they were going to be because they were holding out for a lot of election dollars and Olympic dollars and so forth that unfortunately are not going to come to fruition. So we have, it's much like a supermarket, inventory is a perishable item. So if you do not sell it, it goes bad. There's nothing you can do with it. And so I think they're trying to maximize that right now.
Okay, Next question is, who in the radio sphere are the radio imaging buyers, and what are some effective strategies to gain their attention? Who wants to take that one?
I mean,
I'd
I
say,
can jump in.
yeah.
You know, I deal with the buyers pretty much every day. So who are the buyers? Obviously broadcast groups. The majority of the decision makers on these are program directors. In some stations, or in some cases, that decision goes further up to the GM and maybe a market manager based on the level of involvement and how, I guess, big or small that market is. But some effective strategies to gain their attention. I mean, I think you could go back and talk about all the things that were listed over the last, 10, 15 minutes, and I could put those into the effective strategies bucket. It's about making sure that the brand is curated and where it should be. I think one of the most helpful things for VO talent to endear themselves to PDs and buyers is to develop those relationships. And the only way to really do that is make yourself visible and participate in the community. And that's really difficult to do now. We have always said that it's really important to get to some of these conferences and meet these folks and create a physical presence and brand so people know who you are and develop that rapport with some of the folks so that when it is a buying decision time, they remember, oh, I really like talking to that guy over a cocktail at whatever conference I was at. That makes a difference. It's really difficult to do that now, but there are communities for this stuff online. I think everybody probably belongs to them already, but be visible and participate in those and be a part of the community to where you're able to be seen. So that plus, of course, all of the marketing stuff that we've already talked about, I think are probably the best route.
And I'd agree 100% with what Masa said. And I think the more you can do to give back to the community, we've found that doing events like we're doing now, just trying to be a voice and be a positive force in the radio imaging and voiceover world is paid back. We've paid ourselves back many, many times. And I just, I think everyone that's on this call is passionate about what you do, passionate about the mediums that we are so fortunate to be able to work in. And I would continue to have that attitude. I don't look at it. I think the way I look at things in the long term is you're just constantly filling a pipe that will eventually, hopefully, pay off. It doesn't always. A lot of times you're just planting seeds that unfortunately may not eventually sprout. But I've always been shocked at things that maybe I do today come back around 6 months down the road or a year down the road. It isn't. In this business, when you go to market and you go to promote, at least our experience, most of the time it isn't like a direct impact. It takes some time. There's definitely persistence is important, and continuing just to do the right thing and help others.
Awesome. So for our next question, we kind of covered it with one of our early ones about the best marketing tools to start with. So not to go over those again, but if you can add anything new, I'd ask this of Masa and Marice. What are the hallmarks of a great imaging demo?
Okay. So for me, it's got to have immediate impact. The three things are really impact, timing, and the story. Now, keep in mind, I've never produced a VO demo, so I guess take that with a grain of salt, but I listen to a lot of them. So, it immediately has to make me want to keep listening right off the bat. We used to have a partner that is a recording artist manager, and he had this cliche of don't bore us, get to the chorus. So get to it and get to it immediately. I don't want to have to wait 20 or 30 seconds to really feel something in the demo. When it comes to timing, length is always tricky, but I personally prefer to err on the shorter side versus the longer side. I mean, look at all of us. How long of a YouTube video are you willing to watch, really? So think about that when you think your 3 or 4 minute VO demo sounds awesome. And ideally, it's got to tell a story. Like all of these VO demos are individual pieces that are compiled together with hopefully some sense or thought of sequence, and that curation and sequence matters. So like if you look at all the best albums of all time, you know, and Abbey Road is a great example of this. All the songs fit together on that album meaningfully, and the track order is intentional because it takes the listener on a journey. It's not just like, oh, well, we put, you know, something at number 2 because that's what we wanted to put at number 2. It's there intentionally, and it tells a story that takes you on a journey. So ideally, each piece of the demo should do the same thing, to where when the listener's done with it, it made sense, right? So anytime I can put in a Beatles reference, I want to. So I'm glad I got that in.
Yeah,
Masa, if I can.
See Bill Royal all excited over there. Bill Royal is our resident Beatle mania fan. Sorry.
Masa, when I
double down on everything Masa said. Absolutely right on. And one other addition is, make sure no matter what demo you're producing, you show up in the work. It should not be generic. It's not you imitating what it is this genre sounds like. It is you making the words and the idea your own. And so you're making your own statement within the secret handshake of how this work is done. But I've often said, when I listen to people's demos, it's a good demo. The only thing that's missing is you.
Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I've produced a number of voiceover demos, and I really like to err along the side of seamless transitions. So you don't know necessarily, unless I'm doing it purposefully, that each piece is different. One sweeper might end at the very end, and the other one might pick up in the middle of it. Just like Masa's saying, it keeps it engaging and it keeps it moving forward. It's like a DJ set. You can't tell where the transitions are. You don't even know what happened until it's over and you said, wow, that, you know, really hooked me in. I listened all the way through because I just couldn't stop it. I wanted to know where it was going to go next. So that's really one of my tactics when producing voiceover demos.
And what I'll add will be just very short, but one of my mentors, Johnny K, said, always leave them wanting more. Some people talk themselves out of a job because they send too long of an air check or too long of a demo. And if the program director wants to hear more and is excited, they'll request it. So I like to keep things as tight as possible.
Great. Here's a very relevant question right now. What is the best use of my time right now? Who wants to take that one?
That is a good question. Why don't you kick it off, Dave? What would you say?
You know, I guess it all depends on what you have going on in your life. I mean, obviously if you're working, I would assume, you know, everybody has slowed down a lot. I would think you're going to want to be doing things like this. You're going to want to be plugged in. You're going to want to be finding out what's going on in the world, in the market, in the industry, and keep working toward learning more and possibly, you know, getting more work.
I would say by being on the very nature of this call and continuing to grow your craft is the single most important thing that you can possibly do. I remember, again, referencing back in 2009 when Masa and I were let go from Clear Channel. I remember going out and getting books and reading. One was I Was Fired. It was the best thing that ever happened to me. And it was written by a guy by the name of Harvey McKay. And he took 50 stories of people, athletes and celebrities and business people that had been let go and went on and had phenomenal careers and businesses and so forth. And so I really took it as an opportunity. And I guess I didn't see it at the moment, because at the moment I was panicked and had all sorts of anxiety of how am I going to pay my bills and how am I going to survive. But that maybe that fear that I had, it channeled something in me to just really get going. I felt like I had to be moving and going forward. And so I do think this is a phenomenal opportunity. Have you guys seen all over television right now, Frog Tape? The advertisements for Frog Tape. I don't know. Here, I can't get away from them. And it cracks me up, and I'm thinking, why are they running all these commercials for Frog Tape? And it's because a lot of people are at home not working and are repainting their houses. But here's a brand that I don't think anyone had heard of, or at least I hadn't, and now it is just omnipresent everywhere. And they're taking advantage of this situation that is a really crummy situation, but branding themselves as being the superior tape, and you don't have to worry about the paint running onto your baseboard and so forth. And I think that's a very clever way to take advantage of what is a crummy situation. And how can you take what's happening in everyone's lives and turn that into a positive? And that would be my advice.
Excellent. Anyone else want to weigh in?
I would say that, for years, decades, people would come to Hollywood to be discovered. And I think now what I would say to people is discover yourself. Find, no performer is ever really fully used up. There's always reservoirs of your talent that you haven't tapped. And now is a good time to experiment. Read copy that you've never read before. Read children's books, read novels aloud, and find different ways to tell a story. If nothing else, you'll refresh your own core competency and fill up the well.
I'd agree with that. I'll just make a quick comment too, that I think sometimes, we get a lot of things that become stagnant because you're doing the same kind of work. But I think, exercise and going outside of your normal realm, like Marice just said, can bring you back to your normal. And it seems like it's kind of fresh and new. I'm sorry, there's a bit of a delay, but one last thing is, I think education and, improving your brand. There's a book that I'll mention. It's called The Power of Habit. It's by Charles Duhigg. I think right now, especially since everybody's had a slight change in their normal routines, habits are really big and important and can play a huge part in your life. And I think reading about how they have across business, sports, entertainment, and then applying them to yourself, I think you can make a lot of positive change and make it a little bit effortless. So we're going to move on to the next question here. And it says, we're finding in commercial production, we need more life roles. What would be your suggestion for VOs looking to fill these roles? Maybe start this one out with Marice.
Yes, at first, the question was about character. And character to me is when someone disappears and becomes another personality entirely, like in animation or anime. In radio imaging, a lot of times it's what I call life roles, where you're asked to be the dad, or the mom, or a store, the store operator, or whatever. It's first person endorsement stuff where you become the person who's talking about the product from a personal point of view, from a lifestyle point of view, rather than being the narrator or the announcer. And so it's not necessarily becoming a character as much as it is stepping into that life role and using what's called analogous feelings and experience in your own life, like looking at that tape you were just talking about. Well, how many of you are doing some home improvement work and that tape looks like a pretty good idea to you? It's that simple. It's just putting yourself in the setting, in the environment. I've often said that directing to me is putting an actor in a state of mind. So you need to do the same thing. Put yourself in the state of mind of somebody who's expressing themselves about the new Mazda, as opposed to talking about it from on high as the announcer or the narrator. It's that relationship, that relatedness that comes through when you deliver, even if it's one line, doesn't matter. The one last thing I think I want to say is that we should all operate from, it's terrible, do what you want to do. But, consider operating from a position of gratitude, because we're very lucky that in this time, we're able to continue working and to continue doing something we love.
Awesome. Dave, I got a question for you. If you can tell us what your thoughts are. I know that there's a lot of life roles in the commercial space. What are you listening for when you listen for a demo, or what kind of is the difference between that versus someone who is a character or an announcer?
I want to believe it. I mean, there's aside from the announcer or narrator, like Marice was talking about, there's also a character. It could be a cartoonish character or an animated character, and if it's that, I want to believe that. I want be sucked into this fantasy world that they're creating with that character. But if it's supposed to be a mom and a dad having a conversation about their kid's schoolwork or whatever, I want to believe that. I want to believe that really is a mom and dad right there, and that I'm listening to a real conversation between a mom and dad. So it's all believability, and making sure that it sounds real, no matter what it is. Even if it's animated and supposed to be ridiculous, I want to be sucked into that. I want to be there with that person. That's what I'm looking for.
Years
Okay.
ago on Kasem's CD package, and he had like a stack of them that he would give out. This is what I can do. And across the top of it was the word believability. That's what he hung his hat on.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I got one more question here. Does anybody else want to chime in on that? Okay.
No, I think that was great.
Yeah, and here's one, and I think this stems from, because I know like Adobe and many other services, I think Weight Watchers and several other ones, if you were having a hard time during this pandemic paying the monthly bills, the monthly bill, they would, some of them were waiving for like 2 or 3 months. You would get the service for free for a few months. I know Adobe was doing that with Adobe Audition and stuff. And so as far as for a voiceover person, well, you never want to give your service away for free. Would you offer free services to a business trying to get back up and running? Would this create a good starting point for the relationship? I want to answer that first, and then I'd like to hear Marice's take on it as well. But I would think yes, you would. If you can build, I think that's a great way to build the relationship. That if a restaurant or a car dealer, whoever, they're trying to get back up and running, they've just come through a real rough spot. They don't have cash right now, but I think they're going to remember that once they do have cash flowing in, that you were willing to help them out, and that's a great way to build a relationship. So I would say yes.
Go ahead. Sorry, Marice.
I can speak from my own experience, which is that I am offering everything that I do at 2 for the price of 1, for a better way, any better way of expressing it. So a 1 hour fee is for 2 hours. Directed auditions are, multiples of 3. It's now multiples of 6. And that's my way of giving back, because I'm not traveling. I'm home. I have the time, and I want, I'm in my happy place when I'm working.
I would argue that each one of you has an individual brand, and that brand is, back to the beginning of this conversation, your very essence and what it is that you do and how you project yourself into the industry. And much like brands in the rest of the world, in the normal commercial world, I don't say that, I guess we're all normal, I guess. But Louis Vuitton and Gucci do not give discounts. Louis Vuitton and Gucci is not going to give you a discount, and it just doesn't matter. And that's just the way that their brand is set. And that's fine. And that works really, really well for them. However, I can go down to the Ford dealership and right now get a really good deal on a new Ford Ranger and get 3 months, no financing and 0% interest, because they're known as a manufacturer that does more deals. Probably it's going to be pretty tough to go get a deal at a Rolls-Royce dealership. And by the way, I believe if you look at Walmart, and a lot of people look I look at brands all the time because that's probably what I'm most interested in when it comes to business and marketing and so forth. There's nothing wrong with either side of that, right? There's nothing wrong with either one of those decisions. It just you have to do what's right for your brand. Sam Walton, who started Walmart, he believed that it was actually relatively easy to make a very exclusive brand and make it very expensive because you just targeted a very small group of people. He felt it was much harder to make a store that offered everything at very low prices, and Walmart only operates at a $1 1.6% profit margin, which is completely fascinating to me, incredibly minuscule. So every $100 that they gross, only $1.60 of that is profit. But his goal was to serve as many people as he possibly could and to make the goods that he sold as affordable. So there's neither, I think, a right or wrong answer. I think it has a lot to do with your brand. I tend to be more of, I'm going to do the best I can to help you through this. But there's some people that could criticize me that I'm a little bit too much of a pushover. And I think that that has probably been said about me. But I think there's also a lot of people that think, hey, he's a nice guy. So I think you really have to do some introspection about what your brand stands for, what it is that you do. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer to it.
You can be both, Chachi. You can be a pushover and a nice guy.
You're right.
It also has to do with the kind of business that you're in. We're all in a service business. You know, we're all in a people business. What we sell are our thoughts and our feelings, ideas, our relationships, as opposed to, you know, a box of Tide. And so I think that that has a difference in what our, you know, the decisions we make about our business and how we present ourselves.
I agree. I think that is it with our questions. Does anybody else have a question? If they've got one, feel free to put it up in the chat box on the upper right-hand corner of the GoToMeeting screen.
Because everybody is muted, I think what I'm going to read a couple of comments, just commentary for the group, and then if your question was there, feel free to open up your mic and ask. One of them that I thought was a great point that I was sent privately was on posting work. It was the comment that they said, I always try to include the station's producer and writer on the post, crediting them with their efforts in the creative process, as opposed to just listen to how good I sound. I think that's really smart. It's going to endear you to the producers, the writers, and the people who don't get the glory. And I think it shows the little bit of humility that, you know, I didn't get here by myself. I had a strong team with me. So I think that's a really good point.
I agree with that, Teddy. And when I make posts as well, I tag the VO artist in it.
Nice.
So it's like a paying it back, you know?
Right.
Yeah, I do think it's incredibly important to give credit, and I always appreciate it. And I think it's a nice thing to do. It gives a little bit more depth to your post as opposed to it just being self-serving. Aaron Setch has a very important question. How does Masa grow the perfect beard? That is, not only does he have perfect beard, but he's got a perfect head of hair that I'm incredibly jealous of.
Yes, he does.
So quarantine really does wonders for the appearance here. So I'm just trying to look like George Harrison behind me, if anyone could see that. I'm just doing my That 70s Show audition is coming up. So
and no grays too. You'd think he doesn't have kids.
Yeah,
no,
right?
Trust me, they're in there.
Jim Davis says, regarding radio imaging demos, someone told me the demo should be a tribute to the talent, not the production room. That's a great quote.
Right. Yes. Good.
I want to thank Marice so much for putting this on, and thank you to everyone for joining us. Really thankful and grateful for all of your friendship and support of Benztown, and I hope hope you feel the same about us. And if there's anything that we can ever do, please don't hesitate to reach out. Stay safe and healthy, and I hope everyone's careers prospers. And I feel I feel the worst is behind us, and we're climbing out of this, and things are going to only get better.
Agree.
Have a great evening and a great weekend, everyone. Thank you so much.